The following program is brought to you by the University of Alabama.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dave Franco. I'm Associate Provost and Dean of the Graduate School here at UA, and it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to the opening plenary session for the 2012 NOSC meeting. Before going any further on the program, the member schools of the Engagement Scholarship Consortium are listed in your program, and there are representatives of each university here today, and what I'd like to do is start out, have each of those representatives stand, and so that we can recognize the fine work they do helping us organize this conference. Anyone else? Thank you very much. Our opening plenary is going to be presented in two segments in keeping with the conference theme, which, as you know, is Partner, Inspire, and Change. First, our presidential panel will discuss unique ways that their universities are partnering with communities and how that partnership is changing the academy. And then we'll have a second part of the plenary, Ambassador James Joseph's inspirational keynote address. But before going any further, it's my pleasure to introduce our university's president, Dr. Guy Bailey.
Thank you so much. It's great to have you here. For me, it's great to be home. I'm in my fourth week on the job, and this is not my first sojourn in Tuscaloosa. I came here 44 years ago as an undergraduate, left 38 years ago with 2 degrees. I was here 6 years, but I like to point out to students I got 2 degrees during that time. Never knowing that I would come back in the role I am today, and it's really, truly an honor and a privilege to be at this university. It's also an honor and a privilege for us to host this conference. This is the largest gathering in the world of engaged scholarship faculty, staff, students, and community partners. That gets your whole range of constituents if you're a president. If you've got your faculty, staff, students, and your community partners, you've got just about everybody there. I think we have 100 presenters, about 500 registrants, and we're particularly happy here to host this conference for a couple of reasons. It's the first time a non-land grant institution has hosted it, and if that doesn't tell you where engaged scholarship has come, nothing will. We think about engaged scholarship and community outreach as part of a land grant school's mission. I was chancellor at an urban university a couple of universities ago, University of Missouri, Kansas City. We saw that as part of our mission, but for traditional universities like the University of Alabama to see it as a central part of the mission tells you how far this field has come. We're also happy to partner with Auburn University in doing this, and most people think that Alabama and Auburn don't do very much in common. I have to tell you, it's not true. I have a daughter who has 3 degrees from that school, so they have a lot of my money, and and they did a nice job with her too. I could never say anything bad about them, you know, around your daughter and so forth. But they have been great to work with, and if you wonder about the relationship between the two institutions and the fact that the friendships run deeper than even the battles over football, if you simply remember what happened after the tornado last year, and as many of you know, Tuscaloosa was devastated by a tornado. In fact, we're very fortunate it did not hit this institution. But when the call for student participation in helping to clean up and rescue people came out, our students were there. Auburn students came as well. And it was very gratifying to see Auburn faculty, students, and staff, our students and staff, all working together on that. And if you ever want to see the concrete implementation of community engagement, that's it. That transformed anyone who wasn't committed to engagement and outreach before that incident at this university certainly is now. So, as I said, I think it's particularly appropriate for us to host it here. And I'm looking forward to the presentations, to hearing from my fellow presidents as well. And I want to offer some special thanks to people who've made this conference possible. Dr. Hiram Fitzgerald from Michigan State University, president of the ESC board, the entire ESC board. Dr. Fitzgerald and the board members, would you raise your hand? Yes. Thank all of you very much. At our university, Dr. Carolyn Dahl and the College of Continuing Studies and their staff for their extensive work in planning and implementation, and Dr. Samoy Pruitt, who works for me and keeps me focused on this issue even when my mind tends to wander somewhere else. And then special thanks to all who are listed in the conference program. It's a delight to have you here. I think the weather's going to clear up and you're going to enjoy beautiful October days in Alabama. Again, welcome very much.
I wanted President Bailey to have the first word here, so I did not tell you a little bit about his background, but I'm going to do so right now before introducing the rest of our panelists. Because as he said, he's only been here less than a month and already has made a huge mark on the campus. Before coming to UA, Dr. Bailey served as president of Texas Tech University, and I know there's a lot of folks here from Texas Tech. There you go. He was there as president from 2008 to 2012, and during that time, Texas Tech saw its enrollment grow by 14%, its research expenditures increased by almost $90 million, or 170%, and graduation rates increased markedly. Tech met the state criteria for participation as a National Research University Fund, and Dr. Bailey and his team completed a $1 billion business plan at Texas Tech to guide the university to an AAU-like profile over the next decade that will increase the university's economic impact from an annual figure of $1.4 billion to over $3.7 billion. He also served as the chancellor of the University of Missouri-Kansas City and provost and executive VP at University of Texas at San Antonio, and held earlier positions at other universities. He brings an expertise from all of those institutions, as do our other presidents, and that's one of the reasons why this panel is going to be so exciting. You've already met Dr. Bailey, but let me take a moment to introduce the other members of our distinguished panel of presidents. First, Dr. William V. Muse. Bill Muse served as the president or chancellor of 3 universities: Auburn University, the University of Akron, and East Carolina University, over a period of almost 20 years. He had earlier served as the business school dean at Texas A&M, Nebraska, and Appalachian State, and as a business school professor at Georgia Tech and Ohio University. His PhD in management is from the University of Arkansas, and he's currently the president of the Kettering Foundation's National Issues Forum Institute, and he also serves as the vice chair of the United Way Foundation of Greater Cincinnati, among many other board appointments. Next, please meet Dr. Lee T. Todd, Jr. Lee Todd is a professor of electrical engineering and the former president of the University of Kentucky, a position that he held from 2001 to 2011. He received his undergraduate degree from the University of Kentucky and his master's and PhD degrees from MIT, where he received 6 U.S. patents. In 1984, he left the university and began two technology companies based on his patented research activities. One of those companies was purchased by Hughes Aircraft and another by IBM. Dr. Todd also founded the Kentucky Science and Technology Corporation, a not-for-profit organization focused on increasing university research capacity, developing science education, and encouraging an entrepreneurial economy. He's a member of the National Academy's Committee on Research Universities and serves as chair of the advisory board for the National Science Foundation Directorate for Education and Human Resources Committee. And he is the past chair of the board of directors of the APLU. And finally, Dr. David Wilson. who is the president of Morgan State University and has a long record of accomplishment and more than 30 years of experience in higher education. Dr. Wilson holds 4 academic degrees, a BS in political science, an MS in education from Tuskegee, and an EDM in educational planning and administration from Harvard University, and an EDD in administration planning and social policy, also from Harvard. He came to Morgan State from the University of Wisconsin, where he was the chancellor of both the University of Wisconsin colleges and the University of Wisconsin Extension. And before that, he held numerous other administrative posts in academia, including executive positions at Auburn and Rutgers universities. Dr. Wilson was named one of the nation's top 100 leaders in higher education by the American Association of Higher Ed, and was honored by the University of Alabama last year with an award for outstanding leadership in engaged scholarship. It's my pleasure to recognize and welcome this distinguished panel to the National Outreach Scholarship Conference. Thank you. Now, we anticipate a lively discussion with our presidents here, and we might begin this conversation by asking our presidents 2 simple questions, which are not all that simple. Why their respective campuses see engaged scholarship as an important part of their mission, and secondly, how their campuses have supported this approach to scholarship, and what have been the challenges that they have seen in supporting engagement scholarship in their respective campuses. Gentlemen, go ahead, and whoever wants to start first. Go ahead.
Well, I had the opportunity to serve as president or chancellor for 3 universities over a period of about 20 years. And for 15 years prior to that, worked in academic administration. So my comments will be focused on really a composite of all of those experiences in terms of engaged scholarship. But I'd have to tell you that my philosophy about what constitutes engaged scholarship and the importance of engaged scholarship was shaped much earlier. As a young boy, I became captivated by the sport of baseball. And I read every book I could find about how to play the game. But I learned very quickly that in order to play the game well, I had to venture out on the field. And that is where the real learning took place, over a period of practice and putting into place what I had practiced to do. And this shaped my educational philosophy. As an undergraduate and graduate student, I found that I learned as much, perhaps more, from my out-of-classroom experiences than I did inside the classroom. So as a faculty member later, my field was in business administration. I used in-class exercises like the case method and used assigned projects in order to help the students implement or learn more about what they had been taught. As a business school dean, I established internship programs for the students, brought practitioners from the business world in to teach, and formed one of the first small business development centers in the nation. As a president, I encouraged all of the academic programs with admittedly mixed success, but to provide opportunities for their students to apply what they had learned. I'm very proud of one of the examples of where an academic program really did an outstanding job of that, and that is a rural studio that was implemented by the School of Architecture at Auburn in the Black Belt here in Alabama. And you'll have an opportunity to visit that on Wednesday as a part of this program. Now, I came to conclude that there are 3 very distinct stages to the learning process. And I call these my triple A's: acquisition, assessment, and application. Our traditional focus in higher education has been on the acquisition stage, where we help students acquire the knowledge that we perceive that they need to know about a particular subject through lecture, through demonstration, and through other methods. And this is usually done by a specific individual professor, who this individual then typically is responsible for performing the second stage, that of assessment, determining to what extent the student has gained an understanding of what is perceived to be important. The third stage, that of application, which is central to certain disciplines like medicine, for example, but too often, in my opinion, it has been what we get to if we have time. But the world of higher education is changing very rapidly. And I believe that these changes will bring engaged scholarship, bring the application stage to the forefront. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in our discussion.
Thank you.
Bill, thank you for your remarks. I guess I would like to come at this just a little bit differently. I actually assumed the presidency because of my career in outreach scholarship and engagement. And I just want to give you some sense of how that happened, and then I'll answer the question directly. I had a pretty kind of traditional tenure in higher ed until I got to Rutgers-Camden in roughly 1988. And when I arrived at Rutgers-Camden, of course, is located in Camden, New Jersey, and it is one of the more challenged cities in the United States. And as I walked that campus, it was truly an enclave. And what I heard in the city of Camden was that there was this understanding amongst residents that Rutgers was in Camden, but not of Camden. And they saw this tremendous disconnect. And the provost and I had a conversation about how that institution could not just be in the city of Camden, but could also be of Camden, and that could also extend its tentacles into that city and into South Jersey to bring about needed change. And it was at that point that I began to understand the transformation that could actually occur when an institution looked beyond its boundaries and beyond itself and began to challenge the faculty and others to think about their scholarship in ways that would actually bring about that transformation. And while having just the time of my life at Rutgers-Camden, my telephone rang, and of course, it was the gentleman to my right, Bill Muse, who was the president at Auburn, and who had come to Auburn with the same kind of perspective in terms of the role of an institution that I had been a part of in terms of the transformation at Rutgers-Camden. And Bill convinced me that he was also about extending the tentacles of Auburn even more across this state, particularly in the Alabama Black Belt, and to work with faculty to make sure that if they follow along, that their scholarship and their research would count in the tenure and promotion process. And so for a very long period of time, 7 years to be exact, we worked assiduously with the Faculty Senate, with others at the university, to bring about a reform of the tenure and promotion process at Auburn to reflect the fact that if faculty actually engaged in this research, engaged in this scholarship and apply it, that they would actually be promoted in the tenure and promotion process. And so with that kind of backdrop, let me just say a word or two about what I do now, and then I'll bring this to a close. I'm the president of Morgan State University in Baltimore. And for those of you who don't know much about Morgan State, we are an institution of roughly 8,200 students. But we have a number of firsts associated with us. We are the first, or I should say number one, in the United States in producing African-American electrical engineers. We are number 3 in the United States in producing African-American engineers overall. By the way, North Carolina A&T is number 1, Georgia Tech number 2, and we're number 3. We are number 3 in the United States in producing African American doctoral recipients, Howard University being number 1, University of Michigan being number 2, and we're number 3. And when I came on board, the institution, much like Rutgers Camden, found itself having paid a whole lot of attention to producing those graduates to lead the nation in innovation, but had not paid a lot of attention to how the institution could transform the area where the institution is located in Northeast Baltimore. And that particular area, too, is beset with a number of challenges. And so for an entire year, we engaged in a strategic planning process to think about how this research institution, as it continues to grow and mature, would not just do that for the sake of becoming just another research institution. How could we do it with applied scholarship and research in mind? And so we have introduced something at Morgan that we're calling the Morgan Community Mile. In essence, we have drawn a circle around the campus that is a 1-mile radius. And that's going to be our focal point for the next 10 years. And we are now conducting an extensive analysis of everything within that mile. Unemployment, the nature of small businesses, education attainment. We're looking at the rate of innovation within the mile, crime within the mile. And basically, we are then bringing those results back to our faculty and are saying to our faculty, if you join us in bringing about reform in Northeast Baltimore, with Morgan as the anchor institution, when you're up for tenure and promotion, it is going to count, and you can come back at any given point in your life and look at what your work has led to in terms of the difference in the lives of the people that it has made. So I have much more to say about that, but I'll stop there.
I'm eager to hear that. So I'll give a bit of a personal story about why I thought engagement was important. I've been in business for 18 years when I started the presidency at UK. But primarily my wife and I are native Kentuckians from rural Kentucky, started first grade together, and cared about the state. I made a comment when I interviewed that I don't be the president of a university, I don't be the president of this university. Partly because I thought that the University of Kentucky could change Kentucky, and it needed it. Later in my my first year, I came up with a term called Kentucky Uglies. It just hit me one day. I was speaking at a health conference, and I looked at the statistics, and I said, damn, this is ugly. And I said, if we don't face up to it, if we don't count this stuff, if we don't measure this stuff, we're never going to solve it. We did a bus tour the next year throughout the state to talk about our research challenges. And I looked through a book the other night, and there must have been 100 headlines about that trip, and all of those had Kentucky Uglies in the headline. It at least drew attention to the fact that we're going to talk about these things that have been holding us back. We're leaders in lung cancer, heart conditions, poor oral health, and so forth. But when I took the job, it appeared to me that the university had been acting like it was already a big research university, stiff-arming the K-12 system and not doing much, not working in the shadow of our dormitories on some of the problems that were really eating at our city with the gap between the students that were in our population. And I made the comment that, you know, we need a higher purpose. We've been challenged by the governor to become a top 20 public research university. And we could do that. Let's just hire a bunch of scientists and engineers. Let's go after the federal grants. Let's forget about, you know, arts and sciences, the arts, some of these other colleges. And we can be top 20 measurably by 2020, but we'd fail the state of Kentucky. We need to change Kentucky. I'd like to see our best minds working on our toughest problems. And that attitude, and I think you hear it from these two presidents, it helps when it comes from the president's office. It makes people at least listen. It's unfortunate, but that's the way it works. I realized that we were a land-grant university. We had an ag extension network that had done a tremendous job. I call them our trusted ambassadors. Everybody knew them. They were out there, and they were doing agriculture and family nutrition very well. But I thought they were undervalued for what they could do. We had a conference of all the ag agents at my first year, and I asked 6 of our deans from business and engineering, healthcare, and so forth to speak to that group of agents about how they could use their network for research in their fields. After that, the 6 deans lined up on a table, and the biggest line was behind the fine arts dean. And the rural ag agents were saying, we need arts in our communities. And I'm proud to say that we have probably the only fine arts ag agents in the country right now. I think we have 4 of those, and the counties pay for them. But I told the agents, you can be a conduit for us. You don't have to understand everything we do, but you have to know how to make contact between a need and your community. Once I got talking about it, several people popped up and wanted to do something. And then I figured out we ought to put this together because I can't handle it. Presidents have about that much time to spend on anything. Many of you know Phil Greasley. Phil is doing well. If you know he had a health problem, but he's doing great. Just talk to him. I put him as Associate Vice President of Engagement. And we defined what we call the Commonwealth Collaboratives. And I told the faculty, send me a proposal about some problem that Kentucky has where you feel that your research can have an impact. And I'm only going to give you $10,000. It's just in-state travel and maybe part of a graduate student. Find something you can measure. That's my engineering business background, I guess, so we can see whether we're making progress or not. We got 41 proposals in that effort. Phil oversaw those. I'll get into the assessment of all that in just a few minutes. But they took on problems like preterm births, which was 18% in my home county in Kentucky, got it down to 4%. They took on methamphetamine training for police forces. They took on tobacco-free communities to try to rid a tobacco-generating state of some of the lung cancer issues that we've had. And they took on real problems. Pragmatically, there were 2 things that drove me. One, I thought it made sense and that people would want to do it. 2, though, we needed to be covering the state politically because all the regional universities were vying for cash just like we were. And if we were the University of Lexington, that didn't make much sense. Even the ag, the network we had was a bit discounted because, well, that's extension. That's not even really UK. It'd be here anyway. And so we now have stories to tell all the politicians when we go to their local counties about things that we have done in their region using our research and using their people. Secondly, it was an effort to try to get some of the faculty who were not engaged anymore in research to be re-engaged, to take on something that they felt in their heart and soul that they'd like to be involved in. And that has worked to some extent as well. But I just think it was the right thing to do for not only a land-grant university, but as you already heard, for any university to get out and use our knowledge to solve problems that afflict our people.
You know, I'd add just one thing to that. I think as a president, because the public is one of your constituents, you see issues out there, you see problems, and pretty soon you begin to realize, as all of these gentlemen have said, that you have human capital resources in your university that can help deal with those. And been a couple of mentions of the Alabama Black Belt here. I grew up in the Alabama Black Belt, so I'm well aware of the issues there. And coming back to the university, you know what those problems are, the issues are in your state, and you realize that you have talent, you have talented resources. You may not have all the money in the world, but you've got a lot of brain power there, and that you can bring to bear on problems, things that other people can't. And then it becomes, once you see that, it becomes your responsibility. It's easier to see in some places than others. When I was at Missouri, Kansas City, we straddled the line between what was the historically African-American community and the white community in Kansas City. And we understood that we needed good relationships with both groups for us to be successful. It was just real apparent there from our physical location, the kind of things we needed to do. We sit at the northern edge of the and northern western part of the Black Belt, and Auburn, of course, at the eastern part. And you understand that while the state has made much progress in economic and educational areas, that part of the state hasn't made the same kind of progress. And you understand that as a citizen of that area, you owe the area something. And I think all of these gentlemen will verify there are faculty members that you have who are simply waiting to be asked and waiting to be engaged. So you see that as your responsibility, I think, going forward.
Gentlemen, you touched on two really important points as I was listening to what you said. First of all, universities playing a central role in the region in which they are located. It can be a mile away from campus, it might be the whole state, but having a vested interest in improving things that are going on in the environs of the university. You also talked about outreach and getting involved with folks outside the university to make significant change go on. But as we know, one of the things that's really difficult in engagement scholarship is moving from the concept of outreach to engagement, where you're actually partnering with folks in the community and they are active agents with faculty members and staff members and students to affect those changes. Do you have any tips on how best to accomplish that? I think some of you touched on that. And secondly, you also touched on the notion of making sure that this work counts among the faculty and students, that it counts for promotion and tenure, that it counts in evaluations. Any tips on how you have done that at your respective institutions? Move to engagement and develop a culture of rigor.
I have actually relied upon a strategy that I developed when I was at Auburn, and it was a strategy when I was at Auburn where we went all over the state, Bill, and we had statewide conversations, and we invited into those conversations various constituents, and basically we just asked 2 or 3 very basic questions. One was, what are some of the challenges that you're facing in this particular region of the state? And are there programs coming from the institution that perhaps have been in place for 20, 25 years that are not working to meet those challenges? And what is it that we can take back to the institution in order to excite our faculty about working with you to identify the challenges that you raise? And that strategy actually worked very, very well for us when I was at Auburn to produce this sense of engagement, not just we are the university, we know it all, you are the community, you know nothing, so to speak, and therefore we are coming to treat you. Engagement is just the opposite. It's, you have a series of challenges, the community perhaps understands those challenges just as well, if not better, than the university. The university has certain kind of expertise, and so how do you bring those two things together and make them work for the betterment of all? I used the same strategy when I was chancellor of the University of Wisconsin Extension and the University of Wisconsin Colleges. We went all over that state, engaging all constituents in the same kind of way. And at the end of the day, I think the constituents felt that their voices were heard, that whatever came about as a result of that conversation in terms of a strategic plan, it was with them in mind. The faculty felt that they had a part to play in that, and so that worked very well there. And then at Morgan, I do something a little bit different. I actually have community walks. I walk the neighborhoods 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 6 o'clock at night. I have residents actually to gather in their homes, and we have coffee and tea, and we talk about what the challenges are on this block. What are the challenges within a 3 or 4 block area? And I take faculty members with me so they can hear those things directly. And when I got to Morgan, the neighborhoods there didn't trust the university at all because they had seen the university actually develop, and the construction projects were enormous, $500 million in construction, and they're seeing all these wonderful buildings go up, but nothing is happening in terms of the way they're seeing the world. And so I recognize that, and so now we have the great support of all of those neighborhood associations, but the faculty who are part of those walks and who are part of those conversations, they understand as well, how to work with the communities in order to promote the kind of reform that I spoke about earlier.
I want to take off on one thing that President Bailey said. You actually, I think, have faculty out there that want to do this, think about it, and have contacts. And when I got in office, I said, I'm going to let the lid off of the place. I'm going to just say, get out there and find something that you want to do in the community. and let's see what it looks like. And it was enough that we had to actually form the vice provost office. But I said, if those people, after we let the lid off, if some of them don't jump, we'll have to figure out what to do with them. But we had a lot of jumpers. The other piece of it was that we ended up putting up a website where you could go to any county in Kentucky, click on your county, and it would show how many engagement contacts we had in that county and the telephone number for each one of those contacts. And they would either call Phil Greasley's office and get somebody if they didn't know anybody, or they would call the project director. We did write a lot of community proposals with areas. They don't know how to submit proposals. They don't know that as well, how to do all their budgets. Some of them do better than others. But we, in the 8 years we had this going, we put $470,000 in, $10,000 a year for 47 of these collaboratives. They brought in $51 million worth of funding. We tracked it every year. So when you get to promotion and tenure, there is a real concern. When I sent the first request for proposals out, I only sent it out to tenured professors because I didn't want to capture some poor assistant professor in doing something that was really great, I thought, but the committee didn't think so, so they would, stiff arm them. So, but some of the assistants got involved anyway, and they've done very well. We did put through a process of following the Michigan State model of trying to measure engagement to make it a quantifiable plan, and I don't have the details for that one, but part of that was into the map, part of that was into counting the grants and getting the statistics. And we have moving through the Faculty Senate a promotion and tenure policy now, but I haven't tracked it in the last year. I retired a year ago, so I've been traveling. But I hope it gets through. It had a lot of momentum when we left because people realize that we're making some significant progress in there when they go back home. The last thing I would mention about giving people access is that we started a network called the University of Kentucky Advocacy Network, where we chose people throughout the state, many of whom were not alumni of UK, but they were leaders in their community, and they wanted to be attached to the university in some way. We would call that group together to campus once a year, tell them what we were looking for, especially from the legislature. We would have a meeting with that group in our state capitol the day before the first legislative day, and pump them up during the morning, have all the legislators come over, and have them to invite their individual legislators to come over for lunch, and we had a really good turnout. We'd always let a couple of students speak because they win them over pretty quickly. But that advocacy network then heard about the types of stories that we had, and stories are powerful. When you can tell a story about somebody, and we were on our trip, and this hospital director stood up and said, your health care group came down and trained our local physicians how to deal with strokes. We had a 35-year-old young lady had a stroke last week. They treated her. She's back to work within 2 weeks. We wouldn't have done that. It would have been late if we hadn't had that training. But they come up, they stand up and tell you stories. And the advocacy network did help us a lot get the word out. But then we could point them to that map, and they could go to the map and find a contact point. So that's one of the ways we did it.
My experience has been that for significant engagement to take place on the part of faculty, that two conditions have to exist. The first, there has to be the opportunity for that engagement, and number two, it has to count. When I went to Auburn, Auburn as one of the land-grant universities, had a well-developed system through cooperative extension of connecting to local communities. But unfortunately, that was limited primarily to agriculture and related disciplines. And in almost every case, there was very little student involvement in that as well. I was very fortunate, as David indicated earlier, in attracting him to come to Auburn. And he was the first vice president for outreach that the university had. And he worked very diligently in creating those opportunities for disciplines throughout the university, and not just agriculture, to engage communities all over the state. And it was a tough battle, but we got the opportunity not only opportunity, but got engagement to count. And many universities, particularly those that are research-oriented, left to their own preferences, faculty would count research, and not only not just research, but articles that are published in referee journals. And that's the only thing that counts. We cannot afford to do that as universities today. We couldn't afford to do it many years ago, but have done it for a long time. We've got to develop that constituency. And if we have the kind of work that is done by faculty when they engage communities and help them understand what they know about that problem or problems that they're dealing with, and when they engage their own students in helping to solve that problem, they create tremendous support for the university that is very important, particularly in terms of attracting state funding. But you have to have leadership from the top. You have to create the opportunity, and you have to make sure it counts.
Just one quick thing, two quick things, really. I want to emphasize what President Wilson said. I think the listening to community members, you can't overemphasize enough. They have insights that you can't get any other way. And, you know, it's our, especially as presidents, it's our inclination to talk. And, but the truth is that's a situation where we need to be listeners a lot more than talkers. And I think the strategies he mentioned there are really right on the money. And again, the same thing is true with the tenure promotion guidelines. My previous university, Texas Tech, just revised those, and Valerie Payton can tell you in great detail about the struggles and the successes of doing that. I think you do have a constituency among your faculty who are committed to this, and being able to empower that constituency. And by the way, you also have a significant number of your students who want to be engaged as well. And I think empowering them is really a key thing. But at some other point, Valerie can give you all of the details of that recent revision of the tenure promotion guidelines.
Thank you, gentlemen. We've got about 10 more minutes yet, so I want to give us time to focus on maybe one of the key questions that all of us are interested in. What do you see as the future of engaged scholarship, both within the United States, but also internationally, where many of our projects are moving to both a local area and to an international context? What do you see as some of the future benefits, challenges, whatever, in the last 10 minutes?
Well, I think there are two major changes that are occurring in our society that are going to bring engaged scholarship to a more central position. And the first is that of technological changes, and the second are economic pressures. The ability today to present information online and a interest engaging way is going to move us very rapidly to the first stage of education, that of the acquisition of knowledge, to the online or to the video disc stage. So that I fully believe that at some stage a major part of that acquisition stage in higher education is going to take place in that manner. That then pushes the university into a counseling and assessment center mode, a different role for the faculty in assessing whether students have met certain objectives or standards as to what they know. But the stage that comes to the forefront very quickly is that of the application stage. Okay, now you have mastered this body of knowledge that we say is important. We've made an assessment. We are convinced you know that. Now how can you apply it? Can you apply it in the laboratory? Can you apply it in the field? And I see emerging in and almost for every discipline, the idea of at least comparable to a teaching hospital for the medical school, a lab school for education. Everyone has got to have that constituency where they are much engaged in helping students understand the discipline that they've taught them. And a major part of that is not just information that relates to employment or job, but in preparing students to be good citizens. And that's a major role for colleges of liberal arts to engage in.
I'm going to touch on an area that some don't think is engagement in some circles, but it's economic development and jobs. When I interviewed for this job, one faculty member said I scared her to death because I talked about entrepreneurship and economic development. And said, I'm in the philosophy department, you're going to run these kids' minds. And so, well, we need to have a philosophical conversation about the future of our state. If we don't change the economy around here, coal, tobacco, whiskey, and horses aren't going to be our saviors. So we track economic development, and it is a form of engagement. You have to inform potential investors who are out there that will put money up to start companies, to hire your graduates. You have to involve the lawyers, CPAs, the professional community that will help those people found their companies. But you also got to let the lid off of your faculty, let them know it's okay to be involved. First year I was we got a first-year dean when I was teaching at UK, and I'd started the company with these patents I had, and he called me to the office and said, how can you be a professor and have a company? And I said, well, if I was still at MIT and I didn't have a company, I'd be called to the office and say, why don't you have a company? So I'll leave if I have to, and I did the next year. But we track, but I let the lid off when I got back. So we track startup companies UK now, and we have 80 in the Lexington area that brought in $67 million worth of outside venture capital last year. You know, that's an indication that they've got something that people will invest in, because there's not a lot of venture capital in Kentucky. But I really think that and you talk about international, we're going to have to turn these kids to realize they're going to be working internationally. They're going to take more foreign language. They're going to have to learn more about other cultures than what we have in the past. But they're going to have a skill of innovation if this country is going to be competitive. And I just think higher education is the solution to that. And we have to work with the industries that are out there. And that's a form of engagement that I think is going to become more and more important.
And I'll just piggyback on that. You know, I happen to think that we've come a long way in 25 years in terms of outreach engagement. I like to think that maybe around 1995, 1997, we were at a point where we had the support of our respective presidents in driving reform on our campuses, but I think we were trying to convince faculty, particularly the faculty in the Discovery Camp, that we were not dumbing down the university as we promoted the scholarship of application. I think that's where we were 1995, 1997. I think we've come a long way in 25 years, so much so that for me personally, it's very hard for me to take seriously a major research university today that does not have outreach and engagement at the forefront of its agenda. I think that discussion, and I realize that I might very well not be speaking for the entire chancellorial or presidential group in this in this commentary, but it just seems to me that we've come so far in 2.5 decades that we're not having the same conversation today. And to piggyback on what my two colleagues here said, I think that the future of outreach engagement is pretty much centered in perhaps two camps. And one camp may be somewhat of an unlikely camp. And this is the way I would characterize it. What we are seeing in this country right now is a shifting of the population. We're seeing a huge demographic shift in the country. And we're seeing the largest growth in the population occurring in the minority sector. The Latino population, African-American population, multiracial population, but particularly the African-American and Latino population. And those populations are the least well-represented populations in college degree attainment. And so outreach and engagement, it seems to me, is going to be absolutely critical to ensure that those pockets of the population that are the fastest growing pockets that are not well prepared or as well prepared to enter colleges and universities are prepared to do so. Else, as Lee and Bill and President Bailey have indicated, I don't think the country is going to be competitive long term. And so therefore, our major research universities have to make a different kind of argument about outreach and engagement, that we really do need to get out there and connect with these communities and connect with those populations, because if we don't, then who really is going to be on our campuses in 15 to 20 years? So it's almost self-serving on the one hand, but it's also about national competitiveness on the other. The second camp is, I think, that of what I see as a dwindling of state support for the public universities. And I know increasingly, as I go to Annapolis to argue for support for my institution and others, we increasingly hear, well, so what are you doing for the state of Maryland? What are you doing for the state of Baltimore? What are you doing for my district? And it has to go beyond simply enrolling students from that area. They're looking for real concrete things that you are doing to tackle some of these intractable problems in the state, in the district, in the city. And if you cannot make a convincing case of that, that money is going to go to transportation, it's going to go to corrections, it's going to go to those other areas that are at the table making a more convincing argument. So I think in light of, for public universities, in light of the dwindling state support, it is also in our best interest to sharpen that argument and make sure that we can say that our universities are indeed anchor institutions in our state, in our cities, or in our regions.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that point is really well taken. Increasingly, our states expect us to be anchors of economic development and solvers of community problems, and those two things aren't unrelated. If you think about much economic development requires a highly educated workforce, it requires areas with health care, it requires a lot of the things that we as institutions can either deliver or spur. When I was in Kansas City several years ago, as Chancellor of Missouri, Kansas City, one of the interesting things I found was that the Kauffman Foundation, a large local foundation, supported two broad initiatives. One was entrepreneurship, and there was a real focus there on developing new companies, developing startups, and teaching entrepreneurship as part of a college of business. It also supported K-12 education in STEM disciplines, especially in districts with large numbers of underrepresented kids. Now, when you saw those at first, you might think they're unrelated, but they're really not. You're not going to get much of the first without the second. And the Kauffman Foundation understood that these two things go hand in hand. So one of the most important things we will do in becoming anchors for economic development is help with the education of our workforce and outreach in that way. And increasingly, as President Wilson said, it's not just our obligation, it's what's expected of us. It's not just what we expect of ourselves or what we want to do, but what the states expect for us. And so to be successful, I think we have to develop good strategies for meeting those expectations.
Thank you. Well, I don't know about anybody else, but I'd like to keep talking, but unfortunately, we've about run out of time for this part of the plenary, so could we give our panelists a round of applause? Thank you very much. And now at this time, I'd like to welcome to the podium Ms. Felicia Jones, Executive Director of the Black Belt Community Foundation, who will introduce our keynote speaker.